When I first joined the Bennett family, I tried to ignore Madison's attitude. I told myself she would warm up with time. I helped at every family gathering, brought gifts on holidays, and checked in when their father wasn't well. Still, she watched me like I didn't belong in her world. She smiled when others looked, but her eyes always held judgment. I stayed polite because I didn't want to create problems between Nathan and his family. At dinners, she made comments about my cooking, my clothes, or my quiet nature. She joked that I was too soft for real life, or that I was lucky Nathan settled for someone like me. If I spoke up, she'd shrug and say I was too sensitive. Even when it stung, I stayed calm. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Nathan told me to let it go. He said Madison was just blunt and never meant harm. Every time he said that, it felt like he chose keeping the peace over defending me. Over time, the jokes turned sharper. She made them in front of relatives so she could hide behind laughter. She'd say things like, "Emily wouldn't survive a week without our help," or, "If she disappeared, who would even notice?" People around her smiled awkwardly, but no one said anything. Her mother sometimes changed the topic, but she never confronted her. I learned to excuse myself and stay busy in the kitchen or with the kids just to avoid her. I remember one Sunday after church, we were all in the living room. Madison sat on the couch sipping iced tea while I gathered empty cups and plates. She leaned back and said I made a great maid. Some people laughed because they thought she was teasing. My cheeks burned, but I kept cleaning. When Nathan looked at me, he just gave a weak smile like it wasn't worth reacting to. That hurt more than the words. Sometimes I asked myself what I had done to make her hate me. I supported her when she broke up with her fiancé. I helped her plan her 30th birthday. I even drove her to work when her car broke down. None of that mattered. She liked to remind me I was not a real Bennett, just someone who married into the name. I found small escapes to cope. I spent more time at the library, took walks around the neighborhood, or read books in our bedroom to avoid long visits. Nathan thought I was overthinking everything, so I stopped bringing it up. I learned to swallow the pain and carry on with a smile so no one could accuse me of being dramatic. Even with all of that, the night she said no one would miss me was different. It didn't feel like a joke. It was a loud reminder that I was alone in a room full of people who were supposed to be family. I didn't answer her then. I just sat quietly and looked down at my hands. Inside, something shifted. I didn't cry in front of them, but I felt the first crack of something breaking loose inside me. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew I couldn't keep letting her step on me like I didn't matter. Madison was clever with how she acted in front of people. She never yelled or insulted me directly in a way others could clearly call out. She wrapped everything in a half smile and a joking tone, making it easy for anyone to excuse her. When I stayed quiet, she called me boring. If I spoke up, she said I was trying too hard to be noticed. Nothing I did was ever right in her eyes. At the dinner table, she often talked around me like I wasn't sitting there. She'd ask everyone else about their week and skip over me on purpose. If I tried to join a conversation, she'd look at her phone or start talking to someone else mid-sentence. People noticed, but no one corrected her. It was easier for them to pretend everything was normal. There were times she'd say things like, "Emily's too quiet to have opinions," or, "She's probably thinking about something harmless and boring." Someone would chuckle, and that was all she needed to keep going. I'd pause with my fork halfway up, unsure if speaking would make it worse. Silence felt safer, even when it hurt. Nathan never meant to hurt me, but he never stood up for me either. When I told him how her words made me feel, he sighed and said she didn't mean anything by it. He said her humor was dry, and I shouldn't take it personally. Every time he said that, it felt like my feelings were being pushed aside. I started keeping things to myself because I didn't want another conversation that ended with me being told to ignore it. I tried to stay out of her way. If I knew she'd be at a gathering, I kept busy with small tasks so I wouldn't have to sit near her. Sometimes I'd help in the kitchen or take the kids outside. Anything to avoid giving her an opening to speak to me. She still found ways to get her message across. A smirk, a whispered comment as she walked by, a joke meant to sound casual. She once told Nathan's cousin in front of me that I was like a piece of furniture, quiet and always in the corner. The cousin gave a nervous laugh and looked at me with pity. I forced a small smile, but I could feel my throat tightening. It was like being slowly erased from the room one word at a time. I thought I could handle it by staying calm, but that night when she said no one would notice if I disappeared, something inside me stopped making excuses for her. It wasn't just another rude remark. It was cold, and it came with a look in her eyes that showed she meant it. The way a few people chuckled made it worse, as if my existence was something they could casually dismiss. I didn't argue with her. I didn't ask for an apology. I just sat there feeling a quiet burn inside me. I realized that every time I let things slide, she grew bolder. Every time Nathan defended her instead of me, I shrank a little more. That night didn't just hurt, it woke me up. I wasn't going to keep pretending her behavior was harmless. I knew something had to change, and it would start with me, not her. When Charles first got sick, I didn't think twice about stepping in. He had always been kind to me, and Nathan was working long hours. I left my job at the clinic so I could take care of him full-time. At first, everyone in the family thanked me. They said I was generous and patient. But as time passed, their appreciation faded, and it slowly became something they expected rather than valued. My days were long and quiet. I helped Charles with his medication, cooked his meals, and took him to appointments. Some nights, he couldn't sleep, and I stayed up to make sure he was comfortable. It was exhausting work, both physically and emotionally, but I never complained. I thought I was doing the right thing as a daughter-in-law and as a wife. Madison rarely came by. She'd show up maybe once every few weeks, and even then it was only for a short visit. She never asked if I needed help or a break. Instead, she'd look around the house and make comments about how quiet my life must be. She joked that I was retired at 30, or enjoying my little break from real work. She treated my sacrifice like I had stepped down because I couldn't handle a career. Sometimes she'd say, "Must be nice staying home all day," or, "I'd go crazy being that idle." She ignored the fact that taking care of someone sick was harder than any job I'd had before. I wanted to defend myself, but I held my tongue every time. I believed that arguing with her would only cause more tension in the family. Nathan didn't fully understand the pressure either. He appreciated what I did, but didn't see how lonely it could be. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always said no. My world became the walls of our house and the quiet sounds of Charles shuffling in his chair or coughing in the night. I started losing parts of myself without noticing. There were days when I felt invisible. I'd wake up before the sun, make breakfast, clean, check prescriptions, and fall asleep in the afternoon from sheer exhaustion. Nobody saw those moments. Nobody knew how many times I cried in the bathroom just to catch my breath. What hurt the most was how Madison twisted everything. She knew I wasn't working because of Charles, but she still used the word unemployed like I was lazy. She'd roll her eyes if someone thanked me and say things like, "Well, she has nothing else to do," or, "She probably likes being needed." I kept thinking if I ignored her long enough, she'd get tired and stop. I convinced myself that silence was the best way to avoid more problems. I didn't want Nathan caught in the middle, and I didn't want to be the reason for another family argument. So I stayed quiet and tried to focus on caring for his father. But staying quiet started to feel like agreeing with her. I didn't realize how much it was wearing me down until I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized my own face. I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, and her words only made the weight heavier. I still didn't confront her, but something inside me was slowly starting to shift. The day of Charles's birthday started like any other family gathering. I got to the house early to help with the setup. His favorite dishes were being prepared, and I made sure everything was in order: plates, cups, decorations, and seating. I wanted the day to feel special for him because he'd had a rough year health-wise. He smiled when he saw the cake and thanked me for helping, and that small moment made the effort feel worth it. People started arriving one by one. Madison showed up later than everyone else, holding a gift bag like she'd made a grand entrance. She walked past me without a greeting and went straight to the others. I kept working, arranging the last things on the dining table. I tried to stay focused on the reason we were there, celebrating Charles, not dealing with her attitude. The house filled with voices, laughter, and the clinking of dishes. I stayed in the background, making sure everyone had what they needed. While placing utensils near the table, I heard Madison behind me. She didn't lower her voice. She said, "Honestly, if Emily just vanished one day, I don't think anyone would even notice." Her tone was casual, like she was commenting on the weather. There was a pause, then a couple of quiet laughs from nearby relatives. Not loud, but enough to let her know they heard and didn't object. My hands stopped moving. I didn't turn around right away. I wanted to pretend I didn't hear it, but my ears were ringing. I finally looked up and saw Nathan across the room. He had heard it too. He didn't step in. He didn't call her out. He just stood still, unsure or unwilling to say anything. His silence cut deeper than the comment. Madison had always been cruel in small ways, but this was different. She didn't hide it. She wanted me to hear it. And the fact that others didn't defend me made me feel like I truly was alone in that room. I placed the last fork on the table and stepped back for a moment to steady myself. My heart was beating faster, but I kept my face calm. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I didn't argue or respond. I just moved to the kitchen and pretended to check something in the oven so no one would see the look in my eyes. The rest of the meal carried on like nothing had happened. People ate, talked, and joked while I moved around quietly. I served food to the older relatives, refilled drinks, and made sure Charles was comfortable. Every time I passed Madison, she glanced at me with a small smirk, like she knew she'd landed her hit. Nathan came close to me once and said, Let it go. It's not worth reacting to. Those words made my chest feel heavy. It wasn't about reacting. It was about being seen, being valued, being defended when someone crossed a line. I didn't cry in front of anyone. I waited until I went to the bathroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the floor, and fought back tears. I wiped my face, fixed my expression, and went back out to finish the night. But something changed after that moment. I didn't argue, I didn't cause a scene, but I felt a quiet shift inside me. Their laughter and his silence stayed in my mind like a bruise I couldn't hide. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I went to the guest room after everyone left, pretending I was just tired. I closed the door gently, so no one would hear me. As soon as I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the whole night hit me. I didn't sob loudly, but the tears came on their own. I pressed my hands over my face and tried to breathe. It wasn't just about what Madison said. It was about every time I let myself believe it was better to stay silent than to be seen as a problem. I wasn't crying because I felt weak. I was crying because something inside me shifted. It wasn't the kind of pain that makes you give up. It was the kind that wakes you up. I looked around the room and thought about how many times I'd slept there after long nights caring for Charles, cooking for the family, or cleaning up after gatherings they barely thanked me for. I had tried so hard to be accepted that I forgot acceptance should go both ways. I thought about the day I left my job and how nobody asked me how I felt about it after the first week. I remembered the birthday parties, the hospital runs, the family favors, and the times I said yes when I wanted to say no. I thought about Nathan standing still in that room while I was humiliated. It hit me that waiting for someone to defend me had become a habit I needed to break. I didn't want to scream at anyone or make a scene. I didn't want to beg for respect or force anyone to understand my worth. I knew that kind of reaction would only give Madison more fuel. She thrived on attention, good or bad. So I knew I had to do the opposite. I had to remove myself from the role they'd pushed me into. Not loudly, not with warnings, just quietly, completely, and in a way they couldn't undo once they realized the difference. As I wiped the tears from my face, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't keep living like a guest in my own life. They had taken my patience for weakness, my kindness for obligation, and my silence for acceptance. I was done proving myself to people who benefited from me, but never valued me. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My breathing slowed, and the tears stopped. I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt strangely calm, like a decision had already been made somewhere deep inside me. I knew I wouldn't confront Madison directly. That would only turn into another argument where she twisted my words and played innocent. No, she wouldn't see it coming, and she wouldn't be able to laugh it off. The next time she looked at me like I didn't matter, she wouldn't realize I'd already stepped out of the space she put me in. I wasn't going to warn anyone or explain myself. I would make choices that protected me, not their comfort. I wouldn't carry their responsibilities anymore. And when the consequences landed, they would know exactly what they had taken for granted. I didn't fall asleep right away, but when I finally closed my eyes, I felt different. Not defeated, finished. I didn't make any announcements or ask for anyone's opinion. A week after Charles's birthday, I updated my resume, sent an email to my old boss, and waited. Valerie replied the same day and asked if I could come in for a meeting. She'd always respected my work, and when I left to care for Charles, she told me the door would stay open. I didn't know if she meant it back then, but she did. I met her at the office 2 days later. She greeted me with a hug and said she was happy to see me again. She didn't ask why I left before or why I wanted to return now. She just said the team could use someone organized and reliable. She offered me a position with good pay and flexible hours, and I accepted without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was stepping toward something that belonged to me and not someone else's expectations. I didn't tell Nathan right away. He assumed I was running errands or at home when he was at work. I used the hours when he was gone to settle into my new role. I organized files, managed schedules, and helped the team with projects they had fallen behind on. It felt natural to be useful in a place where people actually respected my effort. No one there spoke over me or made jokes at my expense. I didn't realize how much I had missed that feeling. With my own income coming in again, I started saving quietly. I opened a separate account that only I had access to. I didn't do it out of malice. It was about safety. I needed something that belonged to me, something no one could dismiss or belittle. Each paycheck felt like a step away from the version of myself who waited for others to treat her kindly. At home, nothing seemed different on the surface. I still helped Charles in the evenings and made sure he had what he needed, but I no longer spent all day in the house. The Bennetts never asked where I was or what I did during the day. They just assumed I was still available whenever they needed something. They were comfortable believing I had nowhere else to be. Madison, especially, had no idea. She still made comments about me being at home all day, and I let her talk. I didn't correct her or react. I let her live in the lie she created. The less she knew, the better. Valerie often checked in on me and reminded me I didn't have to overwork myself. She said she could see I was carrying more than I let on. She didn't pry, but she paid attention in a way that felt unfamiliar and grounding. Working again reminded me I was capable, not a background character in someone else's life. Every day that passed, I stopped feeling guilty for wanting peace. I stopped apologizing in my head for not being what they wanted. They had shown me how little they cared about my effort, and I stopped giving them the parts of me they took for granted. I didn't announce any change, but the change had already started. I wasn't the silent caretaker they thought I was. I was building something steady and intentional, and none of them even noticed I had moved on from the role they trapped me in. When Charles's health started getting worse again, everyone acted like I would automatically take charge. No one asked if I was available or how I was doing. They assumed I would put my life on hold and step right back into the same role. Nathan came home one evening and said his mom and Madison were already talking about how I could adjust my schedule to stay with Charles during the day. He didn't even check with me first. He just spoke like the decision was already made. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just reminded him of what Madison had said at Charles's birthday. I told him if she believed no one would miss me, then this was the perfect time to test that. He looked confused at first, like he didn't take me seriously, but I packed a small bag that night. I had already talked to my friend, Kara. She knew a little about what I'd been dealing with, and when I asked if I could stay with her for a while, she said yes without hesitation. She didn't ask for details. She just told me I'd have my own space, and that I didn't need to explain anything until I was ready. I left early the next morning before anyone was up. I didn't leave a note or an explanation. I turned off notifications on my phone and only answered texts from work. When Nathan called the first time, I declined. When his mother texted, I ignored it. Madison didn't reach out at all in the beginning, probably assuming I was still around doing what they expected. By the second day, the messages became more frequent. Nathan said his mother was stressed and didn't know what to do about Charles's appointments. He sounded frustrated but not apologetic. He kept saying things like, "We need you here," and "You can't just disappear like that." I didn't reply. Kara didn't push me to talk. She gave me a key and let me use her guest room. I went to work as usual and came back to a place where no one criticized me or took advantage of me. In the quiet of her apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. By the end of the week, the tone of the messages changed. Nathan said Madison was overwhelmed and their mother was panicking. He said Charles had missed an appointment and that paperwork was mixed up because no one knew where anything was kept. I read every word but didn't respond. I wanted them to feel the absence they thought didn't matter. After a few more days, some relatives started messaging me too. They asked where I was and why I wasn't helping. I didn't answer them either. It wasn't my job to explain what they had ignored for years. If they truly believed I was replaceable, then they could replace me. I didn't disappear out of revenge alone. I left because I needed to see what life felt like when I wasn't carrying everyone else's weight. I needed them to sit in the space I used to fill, to feel the difference between having me around and taking me for granted. I didn't slam doors and I didn't make threats. I simply stepped back and let the silence speak for me. It didn't take long for things to start slipping. Charles had a specific routine for his medication, what time to take each pill, which ones needed food, and which ones couldn't be mixed. I had all of it written down, labeled, and organized in a folder and pill box, but no one bothered to ask where anything was. They thought they could just show up and figure it out. Madison took the lead, mostly because she didn't want anyone to say she wasn't helping. On the first morning, she gave Charles the wrong pill at the wrong time. He felt sick afterward, and instead of admitting she messed up, she said he was being dramatic. She called Nathan at work and told him she was handling everything, but sounded irritated the entire call. The first doctor's appointment he missed was on a Tuesday afternoon. I had already confirmed it with the clinic weeks before. When the office called to ask why he hadn't shown up, Madison tried to blame them for not sending a reminder. She didn't even know who his primary nurse was. She also didn't know that his insurance paperwork needed to be updated before the next visit. I used to do all that quietly, without drawing attention. Now it was no one's responsibility, and everyone acted shocked that things were falling through the cracks. A few days later, the nurses at his clinic called again because the prescription refills were overdue. Madison snapped at them and said someone else needed to figure it out. She told Nathan she was tired and not built for this kind of stress. She didn't admit I'd been handling it alone for months before she ever tried. Meanwhile, their mother was calling every relative she could think of, asking if someone knew how to organize Charles's schedule. Some family members suggested hiring a nurse, but Madison refused because she didn't want to spend money. Nathan tried to fill in the gaps after work, but he didn't know where anything was kept. He once called me asking where the folder with the medical records was. I didn't answer. Eventually, Madison sent me a long text saying I had abandoned the family and left them to struggle on purpose. She said I was selfish for disappearing when they needed me the most. I read the message twice before replying. I didn't argue, didn't explain myself, and didn't soften my words. I just wrote back, I thought no one would miss me. She didn't respond after that. From a distance, I watched them scramble. It wasn't out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They had treated me like a background helper, not a person holding everything together. Now they were seeing what my absence actually meant. The calls slowed when they realized I wasn't going to rescue them. I didn't boast and I didn't gloat. I focused on my work, stayed at Kara's, and kept living quietly. For the first time, their problems were not automatically mine to solve. They had to sit with the mess they created when they treated me like I didn't matter. And I meant every word of my reply. They were the ones who insisted my presence made no difference. Now they finally understood what it meant when I wasn't there. With time, the pressure forced everyone to face the truth. Nathan was the first to break. He called me one evening, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. He said he finally understood how much I had been doing all along. He admitted he never paid attention and assumed things would always get done because I was there. He told me he was sorry. I listened, but I didn't rush to comfort him. I told him clearly that an apology doesn't erase the silence he kept when his sister mocked me. He didn't defend himself. He just said he wished he had spoken up sooner and that he regretted letting things get this far. I could tell he meant it, but I also knew words couldn't undo the way I had been treated. Madison was different. Instead of owning up to anything, she tried to rewrite the story. She told people she didn't mean it that way, and that her words had been misunderstood. She acted as if I had overreacted or taken it personally for no reason. She even complained that I made her look bad by walking away when the family needed help. But no one seemed convinced. Extended relatives had already heard pieces of what happened. Some of them had seen me step in quietly for years while others did nothing. Now that I was gone, they started noticing how unprepared Madison was. They whispered among themselves about how she had spoken to me and how Nathan had allowed it. They weren't loud about it, but the judgment was clear. A few relatives reached out indirectly through mutual friends, saying they didn't blame me for stepping back. One aunt apparently said, "You can't treat people like furniture and then cry when they walk out the door." No one defended Madison's comments anymore. The sympathy she tried to gather never came. Nathan, to his credit, didn't try to cover for her. He looked embarrassed whenever her name came up. He admitted to one of his cousins that he had ignored too much for too long and that it was his fault things got this bad. He didn't ask me to come back or fix everything. He just said he wished I would one day believe that he was trying to change. I didn't rush into any decisions. I stayed focused on my job, on my own space, and on my peace. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to pretend the past hadn't happened. I wanted actions, not speeches. Madison's act didn't fool anyone, and Nathan's apology, though sincere, didn't erase the years of being taken for granted. For once, the weight wasn't on my shoulders, and I didn't feel guilty for setting it down. When I decided it was time to take my final step, I didn't make a scene or warn anyone. I contacted Charles's attorney and scheduled a quiet meeting. I explained that I no longer wanted to be responsible for his care or decisions. The attorney understood and helped me sign the necessary documents to officially remove my name from everything. From that moment on, Nathan and Madison were fully in charge. I didn't argue with the family or explain myself in long conversations. I simply stepped away. I made it clear that Madison, who always had something to say about me, could now handle the role she mocked me for doing. Nathan, who stayed silent for so long, would have to manage the responsibilities he never noticed I carried. I returned the keys, the files, and the schedules they never bothered to learn. Once everything was transferred, I turned my attention completely to my work and my own life. I stopped checking in and stopped stepping up. I focused on my job, my routines, and the peace I had built for myself. For the first time in years, I slept without waiting for someone to call me for help. It didn't take long for the weight of everything to land on them. Doctors started calling Nathan instead of me. Bills and prescriptions were sent to Madison. Appointments needed arranging, and decisions needed to be made. No one could turn to me anymore, and I didn't offer reminders or guidance. People around them saw the difference. Some relatives who once stayed quiet now noticed how much I had done without praise or recognition. Madison couldn't brush it off or hide behind jokes anymore. She had to deal with the daily demands she assumed were easy. She didn't get to complain without sounding ungrateful, and she couldn't pretend I'd exaggerated my effort. Nathan tried to manage, but he was overwhelmed. He didn't ask me to come back, because he knew he had no right. He just dealt with the fallout. Madison, on the other hand, kept quiet for once. The same mouth that said no one would miss me had nothing left to say now that I was completely gone. I never yelled, argued, or tried to make anyone feel guilty. I let my absence speak louder than any confrontation could. The silence they once thought was weakness became the boundary that changed everything. They finally felt the emptiness they joked about. They finally understood the meaning of being gone, not just from a room, but from a role, a responsibility, and a life they took for granted. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it to protect myself. And in the end, without raising my voice or repeating a single argument, I made Madison live with her own words. That was all the closure I needed.